A glossary. Conservative. 1. An autocrat in the name of morality and tradition. 2. A believer in small government, just big enough to successfully impose his own values on others. Liberal. 1. An autocrat in the name of equality and social justice. 2. A believer in big government, just big enough to ensure fairness. Libertarian. 1. A political oxymoron. 2. A believer in a government strong enough to protect people from external and internal enemies, and weak enough to not threaten the autonomy of free and responsible individuals. The state, a factory for fabricating falsehoods defined as truths by means of a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Types of tyranny. Economic. The authorities pauperize the people. Political. The authorities enslave the people. The authorities invalidate the people. The principal impediment to personal independence and political freedom lies, not surprisingly, in human nature, specifically in the fact that man possesses a powerful passion to control others, that the most effective way to do so is by infantilizing them and pretending to care for them, and that the most ineffective, indeed counterproductive, way to do so is by respecting them and expecting them to care for themselves, which makes them independent and hence free of their benefactor's influence. The year 1776 marks the publication of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and the birth of the United States of America. Until then, the state was the director of the game of life, and most people would have found it inconceivable that it could play any other role. With Smith and the Founding Fathers, a radically new vision of politics came into the world. In this vision, individuals and groups of individuals are the proper players in the game of life, the ideal state functioning as umpire rather than player, much less director. While this has remained an unrealized and perhaps unrealizable idea, ever since, it has at least been clear that to the extent to which the state is a player, it is despotic, and its principal enemy is individual liberty. In the days of the Founding Fathers, the elitists were egalitarians. They did not fear making their inferiors their equals, embracing the free market. They saw their inferiors not only as potential competitors, but also as potential collaborators. Today, the elitists are paternalists. They fear making their inferiors their equals. Rejecting the free market, they see their inferiors only as potential competitors. During the Middle Ages, when Christianity ruled the human mind, man was over-spiritualized, a situation exemplified by the Roman Catholic prohibitions against dissecting the dead and healing the sick by other than spiritual methods. The dominant ideology then proclaimed that the everlasting life of the spirit in heaven or hell was more important than the fleeting life of the body on earth, and people often behaved as if they believed it. Today, when scientism rules the human mind, man is overanimalized, exemplified by the scientifically established belief that abnormal as well as normal behavior can be explained by and attributed to chemical and physical processes in the brain, and that mental illness annuls moral responsibility. The dominant ideology now proclaims that maintaining and prolonging the life of the visible and tangible body is more important than cultivating the integrity of the invisible and intangible human spirit, and people often behave as if they believe it. Thus, there is now, as there was formerly, an imbalance between body and spirit, science and religion. Christianity was invaluable for raising man's moral sensibility and laying the foundation for individualism and freedom, but was worthless for advancing man's understanding and mastery of the physical universe, including his own body. Science is invaluable for advancing man's understanding and mastery of the physical universe, but is worthless for raising, or even maintaining, man's moral sensibility, or for helping him cope with novel ethical problems. The two greatest enemies of the individual in the modern world are communism and psychiatry. Each wages a relentless war against that which makes a person an individual: communism against the ownership of property, psychiatry against the ownership of the self, mind, and body. Communists criminalize the autonomous use of capital and labor and harshly punish those who traffic in the black market, especially in foreign currencies. Psychiatrists criminalize the autonomous use of the self and harshly punish those who traffic in self-abuse, especially in self-medication and self-destruction. Addiction, obesity, self-starvation, anorexia nervosa are political problems. Each condenses and expresses a contest between the individual and some other person or persons in his environment over the control of the individual's body and mind. On all major vexing political and social issues of our day, the relations between blacks and whites, men and women, crime and punishment, drug abuse and the war on drugs, abortion, mental illness, and suicide, the contemporary liberal intellectual rejects clear, critical, principled thinking and resorts instead to pretentious psychobabble and sanctimonious compassion. The result is the economic destruction of his ostensible beneficiaries and his own spiritual self-destruction. Masses of men can feel equally poor, but not equally rich. Hence, in proportion as we increase the importance of equality in human affairs, we inexorably diminish the importance of other values, such as liberty, responsibility, and justice. This, I believe, is the basis for the anti-capitalist mentality, von Mises, and the liberal infatuation with socialism, communism. If Smith wants work but is unemployed, we in the United States don't accuse the government of depriving him of a job he needs. But if he wants treatment and goes untreated, we accuse the government of depriving him of medical services he needs. Thus, with respect to health care, which we supposedly value more highly than anything else in the world, we reject the capitalist mode of distributing goods and services and opt instead for the communist mode. In the long M, this choice probably poses a far greater threat to our liberty and American way of life than does the military might of the Soviet Union. Today, the liberal acts as if only he felt compassion for the suffering of others. This is why blacks and women, the poor and the mentally ill, believe that Democrats are their allies and Republicans their adversaries. But no person or group has a monopoly on feeling compassion. Nor is the intensity of feeling it politically relevant. The ability to experience compassion intensely, or the unverifiable but self-flattering claim that one is intensely compassionate, does not guarantee that one is especially competent to alleviate the suffering of others. Indeed, all of history teaches us that the persons most effective in relieving human suffering, men like Adam Smith or Thomas Edison, were relatively unconcerned with doing so. Instead, they were concerned with reducing certain basic causes of human suffering, especially the scarcity of goods and services. What now plagues the masses of men and women in advanced industrial societies is a scarcity of meaning and self-esteem goods that cannot be supplied by others or even by oneself once and for all. Instead, they must be supplied and resupplied for everyone by himself throughout his life. The frequency and outcome of personal injury litigation in the United States are best viewed as the manifestations of a specifically American capitalist method for redistributing wealth, ironically, celebrating the Marxist maxim, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. In a modem mass democracy, such as the United States, when the right man says the wrong thing, it is right, and when the wrong man says the right thing, it is wrong. In a modem totalitarian society, such as the Soviet Union, only the right man, who is a spokesman for the party, can speak, and what the party says is right. People dream of making the virtuous powerful, so they can depend on them. Since they cannot do that, people choose to make the powerful virtuous, glorying in being victimized by them. After their secular savior, their Robespierre or Stalin, is safely in his grave, then the people glory once more in denouncing him as a betrayer of their trust. Then they repeat the cycle. In the USSR, the religion of communism determines the mode of production. As a result, people lack consumer goods. In the USA, the religion of therapeutism determines the management of crime. As a result, people lack safety in their homes and on the streets. Jewish polity begins with the ancient Hebrews surrendering their freedom through the covenant between God and Abraham. English polity begins with the nobles asserting their rights through the Magna Carta. The Jewish and Anglo-Saxon people have been particularly thoughtful about the problem of man as a political animal. The former seeing the ideal person as God's favorite child, the latter seeing him as an independent adult, competing and cooperating with other adults. It is a great and dangerous foolishness to believe, as many Americans believe, that people who differ greatly in their religion and tradition Nevertheless, all want to live under the same sort of political system, and that system is American-style democracy. When you hear an American politician running for office say, "I want to serve my country," remind yourself that what the man really means is, "I want the country to be at my service." During election campaigns, the American people and press talk about nothing but how politicians lie and deceive the public. Once installed in office, both the people and the press treat politicians and their lackeys who run government agencies as if they were incapable of uttering a falsehood if their lives depended on it. Ironically, the opposite generalization is closer to the mark. While campaigning, politicians tell us at least some of the truth about their opponents and thus warn us of the folly of trusting them. Once the election is over, however, no politician has any interest, for 2, 4, or 6 years, depending on the office he occupies, in uttering another honest word. In the classic tale about the emperor's finely woven clothes, a child reveals that the emperor is unclothed. That makes him a naked emperor. The point of this story is not only that the emperor is naked, but that he is a liar, anxious to deceive both himself and others. The corruptible politician is an evil, but the incorruptible politician is an even greater evil. Like a deity immune to propitiation by sacrifice, the politician incorruptible by bribe is more to be dreaded than desired. Only in a society governed perfectly by perfect rules of law would ironclad political incorruptibility be desirable. Since imperfect human beings cannot form such a society, political corruption is at once a bane and a blessing in both free and totalitarian societies. Today, there is an inverse relationship between the government's efforts to protect us from other people and from ourselves. The more compassionately politicians try to protect people from harming themselves, the more callously they fail to protect them from being harmed by others. The upshot is a system of government ever more zealous to protect us from driving cars without seatbelts or ingesting illicit substances, leaving us ever more unprotected against murderers and polluters. The collectivist looks to the state to prohibit what he considers to be self-harming practices, for example, consent to electroshock treatment, whereas the individualist looks to the individual to protect himself from such practices. Inasmuch as anti-psychiatrists advocate state control of psychiatric practices they disapprove, they are, despite their seeming agreements with my criticisms of psychiatry collectivists. This is what makes our disagreements more important than our agreements. Modem monarchs reign but do not rule. Modem mental patients have rights but not liberty. Personal generosity, willingly giving what belongs to oneself and doing so selflessly, even anonymously, typical of selfish capitalists and individualists. Political generosity, coercing others to give what belongs to them, claiming credit for helping the needy, and compelling the beneficiaries to pay personal and political homage to the coercer, typical of selfless anti-capitalists and collectivists. People can identify and sympathize with the suffering of a persecuted individual, but not with that of a persecuted group. The fate of a victim, like Alfred Dreyfus or Anne Frank, has generated more concern and compassion than have the fates of millions of victimized Armenians or Jews. This is why politicians persecute groups, not individuals, and this is why politicians are so dangerous. Juvenal summed up the central problem of political tyranny with this immortal question: Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who shall guard the guardians? History, as I read it, has answered his question with a resounding no one. Advocates of parliamentarianism in England and of the separation of governmental powers in the United States have tried to solve the problem by creating several guardians to guard one another. But it hasn't worked that way. Instead, what has happened is that each guardian, in his own way, has tyrannized over the people. I conclude that if people truly want to safeguard their personal liberty and responsibility, then they must limit their own expectations of the guardian's duties. They should expect him to guard them against external and internal enemies, but not against themselves. It is error alone, wrote Jefferson, which needs the support of government. Truth can stand by itself. One could invert this and assert that it is error alone which can support government. Because truth can stand by itself, it has no need for government. And because it has no need for government, truth is fundamentally inimical to government. To the politician who supports the interventionist state, responsibility means that it is his duty to control people and the market. When he does, he feels responsible. When he doesn't, he feels negligent. Telling himself he helps people to be secure and the markets to be stable, he, perhaps, disguises his own need to be in control as concern for the common good. To the politician who supports the free market, responsibility means that it is his duty to leave people and the market alone. When he does, he feels responsible. When he doesn't, he feels meddlesome. Telling himself that he helps people to be responsible and the market to be free, he perhaps disguises his own need to be left alone as respect for the autonomy of the individual. Most people cannot accept the human condition, that is, the actual physical and spiritual nature of man. Maris' inability to accept himself as a physical being is manifested by the denial of death and the affirmation as a reality of life in the hereafter. Man's inability to accept himself as a spiritual being is manifested by the denial of human diversity and depravity and the affirmation as a reality of the fundamental uniformity and decency of human nature, spoiled only by demons or mental diseases. Not until educated persons accepted the finiteness of their physical selves could anything resembling a science of medicine come into being. Mutatis mutandis, not until most educated persons accept the spiritual diversity and potential depravity of human beings can we begin to contemplate a civilized and peaceful ordering of society, maximally tolerant of personal differences and scrupulously protective of individual rights. The plague of mankind is the fear and rejection of diversity, monotheism, monarchy, monogamy, and in our age, monomedicine. The belief that there is only one right way to live, only one right way to regulate religious, political, sexual, medical affairs, is the root cause of the greatest threat to man, members of his own species, bent on ensuring his salvation, security, and sanity. As no two persons have the same fingerprint, so no two persons have the same self-interest. Sellers want to give the least for the most. Buyers want to get the most for the least. Only in the marketplace are both the seller and the buyer compelled to compromise and cooperate if they want to do business. That is, if they want to realize their aspirations. This is what makes free exchange in the market the most moral economic relationship. Introducing fraud, and especially force, into this relationship destroys the balance between the participants, annuls their choice, and hence their liberty and individuality. What is the point of satisfying human wants if it is achieved at the cost of sacrificing what makes human beings human? Until modem times, scapegoats were deprived of life, liberty, and property. Poor women, called witches, were put to death. Rich Jewish merchants, called Christ killers or well poisoners, were dispossessed and usually deprived of their liberties and lives as well. Since the end of the Second World War, we, Americans, have developed a new way of using our scapegoats. Instead of taking away their life, liberty, or property, we give them entitlements. For example, poor inner-city males are entitled to high school diplomas, even if they are illiterate, and to commit crimes, while the police look the other way. Poor inner-city females are entitled to produce babies without having to take care of them, and to make money as mothers without mothering anyone. In short, the modem American scapegoat is not persecuted. He is pampered. The scapegoater's goal is not to liquidate him, but to render him into an object of loathing. Instead of eliminating the scapegoat from the body politic, he is now incorporated into it as an irreparably defective subhuman object that provides lucrative work and self-enhancing worry for a vast core of social fixers and professional weepers, whose task is to encourage the scapegoats to respect their disreputable selves. Sometimes it is said, warned Thomas Jefferson, that man cannot be trusted with the government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? There is thus a fundamental contradiction between a system of government based on the people's choice of their elected representatives and a deterministic psychiatry based on the premise that people are incapable of rational choice.